Few criminal cases in America have captivated the public's attention quite like the disappearance of Kaylee Marie Anthony, a bright-eyed 2-year-old girl from Orlando, Florida, when her mother, Casey Marie Anthony, was acquitted of her murder in 2011. And the verdict just sent shockwaves through the country, multiple countries. I was in Canada like, what? The trial was a media spectacle, a courtroom drama filled with unexpected twists, unreliable testimony, and a mother whose behavior baffled even the most experienced detectives. Casey Anthony's story is one of contradictions, lies, and controversy. She was painted by prosecutors as a selfish, reckless young woman who murdered her child to live a carefree, party-filled life. And that's what most of the public thinks as well. The defense, however, cast her as a victim of lifelong SA, a young mother who panicked after her daughter's accidental death and was forced to cover it up by her domineering father. So in this video, we're gonna delve into every single significant detail of this case, beginning with Casey's unfortunate birth up to Kaylee's extremely unfortunate disappearance, and the grueling 6-month search for the child, and the trial that divided the nation. And finally, we will explore Casey Anthony's attempts to rebrand herself in recent weeks, and she's trying to do so on TikTok. Nay, nay. But anyway, crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, beautiful-minded, intellectually minded freak. I said minded 2 times, but that's okay, because you got a big one. But we're doing just that. We're going from beginning to whatever the hell is happening now on TikTok in Casey Anthony's life. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this extremely controversial case together. You know, I gotta put my glasses on. I can't read. Okay, wow. It's crazy how these work really well. So to understand Casey Anthony, one must first examine the family that raised her. Born on March 19th, 1986 in Warren, Ohio, Casey was the daughter to George and Cindy Anthony, a seemingly average American couple who also had a son and older brother to Casey, whose name is Lee. And George, Casey's father, was a former police officer turned security guard. And Cindy, her mother, was a nurse. And by all appearances, the Anthonys lived a stable, middle-class life, but behind closed doors, cracks in the family structure were already forming. And according to various accounts, Casey had a very troubled relationship with the truth from an early age. She was a pathological liar, which will come into play throughout this entire case. So by high school, she had perfected the art of deception. In 2004, her parents proudly planned to attend her graduation, only to discover that she was short on credits and had been lying about graduating for months. If I did that, if I told my parents that I was graduating and then they found out I just lied about it, I would be disowned entirely. So that was just the first big lie in Casey's life. And then from 2004 to 2006, she would end up getting a job at Universal, working for event imaging solutions at Kodak. But this was a job, again, that she only had for 2 years, which is relevant. And later that same year, Casey revealed something even more shocking, but also something she would deny vehemently, and that is that she was pregnant at the age of 19. So far we have her lying about graduating and then lying about being pregnant until she just basically couldn't lie about it anymore. So it's not looking good. And even to this day, Casey Anthony's paternity remains a mystery. Different men were suggested as the father, including her then fiance, Jesse Grund, and a deceased young man named Jesus Ortiz. However, none of these claims have ever been proven. And on August 9th of 2005, Casey would give birth to Kaylee Marie Anthony, a beautiful baby girl with big brown eyes and a very playful playful spirit. And despite initial happiness, tensions quickly arose. And Cindy Anthony, Casey's mother, who wanted Casey to actually give Kaylee up for adoption, instead became Kaylee's primary taker. Because Casey had said multiple times while being pregnant that she wanted to give Kaylee up for adoption, that she didn't want this kid altogether, which again plays a lot into the story to come. So Casey's role in her daughter's life just grew increasingly distant. So that was in 2005, and then between 2005 and 2007, Casey would have a lot of relationships. She would date Jesse Grund, she would date Ricardo Morales, and Tony Lazzaro. She would get engaged to Jesse and then break the engagement in 2006. And then in 2007, Casey allegedly had a miscarriage from a relationship with Brandon Snow. So she was beat bopping all over the place. But by 2007, Casey was leading a double life. She told her parents that she still had a job at Universal Studios. Newsflash, she didn't. She lied. She had actually just been unemployed for years. So when she left the house, she just wasn't working. She was just partying it up and stealing money from her parents. Just A+s all around. About $4,500 to be exact. And her parents, of which were already really struggling and having financial issues themselves. Not to mention looking after her daughter, Kaylee, on a regular basis. But everything would really start to unravel in June of 2008. So jumping back a few months, in April of 2008, Cindy, Casey's mother, was actually considering kicking Casey out of the house after discussing her behavior with a counselor, because she's a pathological liar, as we know. And her parents were just done with it. And then in May of 2008, Casey would actually start looking for her own house with a friend, Amy Huizenga. And that's what brings us to June 2008, which are the last days in which Kaylee was with us. So on June 9th, 2008, Casey and Kaylee would stay at Ricardo's house, which was a guy that Casey was seeing at the time. And then the next day, Ricardo would see Kaylee for the last time, and they would actually leave Ricardo's house. And Ricardo would go on to say that Casey would give Kaylee drugs in order to make her sleepy or drowsy, and he had a lot of not great things to say about her in terms of mothering, but we will get to that. And whether they were actually dating at that time or if they were just friends, I don't really know, because she was beat bopping around, as we know. But the next day, Casey would change her relationship status to in a relationship with Tony Lazzaro. And then the next day, Casey would tell her friends that she would actually be moving out soon. And Casey would also tell her friend Amy that she actually can't go to Jacksonville because her dad had a mini stroke, which was a lie, of course. And then a couple days after that, on June 15th, Cindy and Kaylee would visit Cindy's father for Father's Day. And this would be the last confirmed sighting of Kaylee. So Kaylee visited her great-grandfather at a nursing home with Cindy Anthony, her grandma, and then Cindy would end up taking the last known photograph of Kaylee there as well. And then Kaylee and Cindy would return home back to the Anthony's house and swim in the pool in the backyard. And then Casey would spend the day with her boyfriend, Tony Lazzaro, which brings us to June 16th, the day Kaylee went missing. So at 12:50 p.m., Casey would leave her parents' house with Kaylee as seen by George Anthony. And unfortunately, he would never see his granddaughter again. And then around 4 p.m. that same day, Casey's phone records show she remained in the area for hours after leaving. And then a few hours later at 7:54 p.m., Casey is seen at a Blockbuster video store with Tony Lazzaro, and Kaylee is nowhere to be seen. And then the next day, on June 17th, 2008, Casey stays at Tony's apartment for most of the day. And from 2:45 p.m. to 4:30 p.m., Casey is at her parents' house with her car backed into the garage. And she would actually borrow a shovel from her neighbor, Brian Berner. And Casey would just tell her mother, Cindy, that Kaylee was just with her babysitter, Zanny. And Zanny is somebody she has brought up before as her babysitter. And then on June 18th, which was the next day, Kaylee again would back her car into the garage at her parents' house, and she would borrow the shovel from Brian Berner for about an hour. But she would tell Cindy, her mother, that she was at a conference in Tampa, and Casey Anthony informed her mother that she was going on a work trip to Busch Gardens theme park in Tampa, Florida, and she claimed that she would be bringing Kaylee along with Zanny, watching her while she attended the meetings. All while Tony Lazzaro confirms Kaylee was never at his apartment. Hopefully this is making sense. So during the supposed 6-day trip, Cindy Anthony received no contact from Casey, despite leaving multiple voicemail messages. And when Casey finally returned her calls, she told Cindy that Zanny had been in a very serious car accident, leaving them stuck in the hospital, which prevented her and Kaylee from coming home. So just excuses, 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 excuses. Do you remember the shovel? And then excuses, excuses. And then we come to the next day, June 19th, where George Anthony reported the theft of multiple gas cans from his shed to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. And later, Cindy Anthony mentioned the incident to Casey over the phone. And in response, Casey claimed that she had returned to Orlando that same afternoon to retrieve insurance information and coordinate with Zanny's family regarding her hospitalization. Excuses, excuses, excuses. And she also stated that she briefly stopped at her home to get some belongings before heading back to Tampa, uncertain of when she would return. And then during this conversation, Casey admitted to stealing the gas cans herself. And then Casey would go back to Tony's apartment and look for other apartments with him, which brings us to the next day, June 20th, where Cindy Anthony continues pressing Casey about Kaylee's whereabouts. And Casey would claim she's still at the conference in Tampa when she wasn't. And that night, Casey would enter a hot body contest at Fusion nightclub. Class act. So while her daughter's missing currently, as far as we know, she's just out in a hot body contest. It's literally impossible for me to be unbiased in this. I'm just not gonna be. All right, anyway, that brings us to June 21st to June 22nd, which was a weekend where Casey would just continue claiming that she was in Tampa. And she would tell friends that Kaylee is at the beach. And Cindy would obviously continue to berate Casey about where the Kaylee is, her granddaughter. And then on June 23rd, Casey would run out of gas and break into her parents' shed again with Tony and steal their gas cans. And Cindy would obviously still insist on seeing Kaylee, but Casey claims her babysitter was in the car accident and Kaylee's with her and she just doesn't know where she is, yada yada, excuses, excuses, excuses. And then the next day, George Anthony would notice the lock on his shed is broken and he would report it to police, but then Casey would arrive home and aggressively hand George the stolen gas cans, just cursing him out. And then the next day, on June 25th, 2008, Casey would tell her friend Amy that her car smells like something died in it. So then the next day, on June 7th, Casey would abandon her white Pontiac Sunfire at an Amscott parking lot near a dumpster. And she would call Tony Lazzaro to come pick her up. And then she would proceed to go to a nightclub later that night. And then a few days later, on June 30th, Casey's car would be towed from Amscott to Johnson's Wrecker, and Cindy Anthony is on vacation and would keep insisting on seeing Kaylee. She just was constantly asking Casey, where is Kaylee? And Casey would just keep on making excuses, keep on making excuses. And then on July 1st, my birthday, Casey would stay at her ex-fiance's Jesse Grun's apartment, and she would tell her mother that Kaylee is now with a woman named Jennifer Rosa. And a couple days later, Cindy would drive to Universal Studios to find Kaylee, but is told by Casey that they are in Jacksonville now. And Cindy would then create a MySpace post titled, "My Kaylee is Missing." And the post is just heartbreaking. Obviously, we'll put it on screen so you can read it, but it's just her saying how much she misses Kaylee, how much she's helped Casey, and she just wants to know where she is. It's just like, oh, gut-wrenching. And then on July 4th, the day after Cindy made that post, Casey would party at Lake Eola and watched fireworks with her friends. And Cindy Anthony would anticipate that Casey would return home after the 4th of July weekend. However, Casey claimed that car troubles during an out-of-town trip left her stranded in Jacksonville, Florida, preventing her from coming home. And she said she will remain in Jacksonville until July 14th, which was 10 days after, obviously, the 4th. And then the next day, Casey would claim that she would actually return on July 12th because her car broke down in Jacksonville. What? But Casey would go clubbing again from the 10th to the 12th on the weekend at Fusion again. But on July 15th, George and Cindy would actually retrieve Casey's abandoned car from the tow yard. And George Anthony actually received a letter that placed Anthony's vehicle in an Orlando tow yard, not in Jacksonville at all. So they figured out she lied again. Because that's what she does. And then Cindy Anthony, who then tried calling and texting Casey Anthony regarding a major problem that she needed to discuss with her immediately. And then Cindy and George retrieved the car, and they noticed that the trunk smelled of decomposition. So Cindy Anthony would call 911 multiple times, growing increasingly concerned, and Cindy Anthony decided to contact Casey's friend, Amy, to inquire about Casey and Kaylee and what the actual is going on. And Amy confirmed that Casey was not in Jacksonville as she claimed, but was instead staying at her boyfriend Lazaro's apartment in Orlando. So Cindy Anthony drove to Lazaro's apartment, where she confronted Casey and demanded to see Kaylee, her granddaughter and Casey's daughter. And Casey reluctantly agreed, and the two set off in the car, but she refused to reveal her destination. So she was just aimlessly driving Cindy around, basically just trying to figure out another lie she could puke out of her ugly mug. So frustrated and alarmed, Cindy Anthony called the police on her daughter while they were on the drive. And Casey would tell her family Kaylee was kidnapped now. That's the lie she came up with. That's what it is. Zanny the nanny kidnapped Kaylee. And she claimed she dropped Kaylee off at the Sawgrass Apartments, but police would look into this and figure out that Zanny the nanny never existed. Well, she kind of did, because in 2011, the real Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez lawyer, John Morgan, told ABC News that Anthony came up with the fake nanny's name after both her and Zenaida visited the same Florida apartment complex on the same day. And after she looked at the apartment, Zenaida filled out an information card that included the names of two of her daughters and the type of cars that they drove. And the information on the card matched what Anthony later told police when accusing the nanny of being responsible for Kaylee's disappearance. So it was literally just this one day where she met this random woman and then just had her information and decided to make her look guilty of stealing her daughter. She was just a weird, random scapegoat. But at last, Casey confessed that Kaylee had been missing at this point for 31 days. And she claimed, like I said before, that Zanny the nanny had taken her as a punishment for being a bad mother, which you are, but insisted that she had spoken to Kaylee on the phone that very day on July 15th, so she wasn't that worried. And when the 911 operator asked why she waited so long to report her daughter missing, Casey responded, "I've been looking for her and have gone through other resources to try to find her," which was stupid. Yeah. And also, Casey wasn't the one that reached out to the police. It was Cindy, her mom, and she was just forced to, basically. So Cindy Anthony reported that Kaylee was missing, stating that she hasn't seen her granddaughter for 31 days, and noting a very strong odor in Casey's car that she describes as smelling like there's been a dead body in the damn car. But the 911 call is crazy, so give it a listen.
911, what's your emergency? I called a little bit ago, the deputy sheriff. I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl. My daughter finally admitted that the baby's in the store. I need to find her. Your daughter admitted that the baby is where? The babysitter took her months ago. My daughter's been looking for her. I told you my daughter was missing for a month. I just found her today, but I can't find my granddaughter. And she just admitted to me that she's been trying to find her herself. There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car.
Okay, what is the 3-year-old's name?
Kaylee. Caylee. Anthony.
Kaylee Anthony?
Yes.
How long has she been missing for?
I have not seen her since the 7th of June.
And the 911 call is just, like, you can hear Cindy, Kaylee's grandmother, just beside herself, like, so worried. It gives me chills. But she's, like, obviously distraught. And then you hear the juxtaposition of Casey when she gets on the phone, and she's just, like, annoyed. She's like, yeah, like, my daughter's been missing, or whatever. Like, it's so frustrating.
Is your daughter there?
Yes.
Can I speak with her?
Hey, Spanish Sheriff's Department, they want to talk to you. Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you tell me what's going on a little bit?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me a little bit what's going on?
My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days.
And you know who has her?
I know who has her. I've tried to contact her. I actually received a phone call today, now from a number that is no longer in service. I did get to speak to my daughter for about a minute.
Who has her? Do you have a name?
Her name is Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez.
Who is that? Babysitter?
She's been my nanny for about a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Yeah, why are you calling now? Why didn't you call 31 days ago?
I've been looking for her and have gone through other resources to try to find her, which was stupid.
So the next day, the police would obviously get involved, and cadaver dogs would alert to decomposition in Casey's car and the Anthony backyard. And Casey would be arrested after providing false information to investigators, including the fabricated story of Zanny the nanny kidnapping Kaylee. And then the next day, forensics tests would confirm that there was a decomposed body in Casey's trunk at some point. And a few days later, at a bond hearing, Casey is declared a person of interest. And the hearing introduced evidence that a cadaver dog had detected the odor of human decomposition in the car trunk and Anthony's backyard. And then fast forwarding a couple weeks, out on the job, a man named Roy Kronk, a meter reader, would walk into the nearby woods near the Anthony house to relieve himself. And he would spot a white object a little bit further away. And he would say in later reports that he was 99.99% sure that it was a human skull. But as Kronk headed towards the white object, he would actually stumble upon a dead rattlesnake. And Kronk was actually with two other employees, and they would scream and make a big fuss about it, so they kind of got distracted during the whole thing. But the next day, Kronk would call 911, and he would meet with a deputy at the scene. But the officer basically just looked one way and looked the other, and he just berated Kronk for wasting his time for a half an hour, and nothing would be found. And for a few days following, Kronk would call the police again, saying that he found a gray bag in the woods, and Deputy Elizabeth Collins would respond, and she wouldn't even enter the woods to look. And then Kronk would call a third time and meet with Deputy Richard Kane, who briefly searched the area but didn't find anything. And Kane would tell Kronk that it was just trash. So nothing would be found at this point. And then on August 20th, the California bounty hunter Leonard Padilla would post Casey's bail. Padilla was actually one of the few people to talk face-to-face with Casey Anthony in 2008 after he flew to Orlando to post the bail. And he said that after talking to the 22-year-old mother for 10 minutes, he revoked her bond because he didn't buy her story. So just not believable, lying piece of shit. So on the 30th, the bond would be rescinded after Casey's arrest for allegedly stealing and cashing checks from a friend, and due to the angry crowds demonstrating outside the Anthony's home. Fast forward to September 2008, and that is when her computer would get searched. And my God, it showed that Casey had looked up the words chloroform and neck breaking and household weapons. Suspicious, maybe? I don't know. And then fast forward another month, in October 14th, a grand jury indicts Casey on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter, and providing false information to law enforcement. And her father, George Anthony, testified before the grand jury that indicted Casey. So she obviously doesn't like her dad that much. And 10 days later, on October 24th, forensic reports from an examination of Casey's car released, noting that a hair strand discovered in the trunk is microscopically similar to those found in Kaylee's brush and showed characteristics of apparent decomposition. Additionally, an air sample of the trunk is found to contain chemical compounds consistent with human decomposition. So we're starting to get some real evidence. And then on December 11th, 4 months after Roy Kronk called the cops saying, "Search the area," Roy Kronk would call 911 again after noticing a small human skull in a wooded area off Suburban Drive, the same spot he called about several times before. And deputies Turso and Porter arrived and confirmed that there were skeletal remains. So the crime scene would be established and a forensic team would recover all of the evidence, and the skull would actually have duct tape attached to the mandible, and there were also trash bags, laundry bags, and a child's blanket. And on December 19th, 2008, DNA testing confirmed that the remains did belong to Kaylee Anthony. However, because the body had been left to decompose for so long, no tests were able to discern Casey Anthony's cause of death. So if they actually searched the area 4 months prior, maybe they would have known. Maybe Casey would be rotting in jail right now, but that's not the case. But internal investigation launched into Deputy Richard Kane's failure to investigate, luckily. The failure to investigate on Cronk's original report. And Kane was luckily found guilty of unsatisfactory performance and untruthfulness. And then on December 20th, a medical examiner would rule the death a homicide, but cannot determine the exact cause, as we know. And then on January 23rd, about a month after all of this, George Anthony, Casey's father, would be taken into custody after attempting sewer slide. And then on September 20th of 2009, so jumping way ahead, the duct tape found on the mouth of Kaylee Anthony was actually contaminated by an FBI document examiner, raising questions about how it would be used in prosecuting the 2-year-old girl's mother for the murder. And the disclosure of the contaminated duct tape was among hundreds of pages of evidence released by the state attorney's office in Orlando. And the contamination was discovered after FBI lab workers noticed female DNA on the duct tape, which neither matched Kaylee Anthony, Casey Anthony, or the toddler's grandmother, Cindy Anthony. And samples were taken to FBI workers who had handled the duct tape, and a match was found with a forensic document examiner. So just poor practicing all over with the FBI, with the police, just on top of everything. It's just so mishandled. This whole case could have been so different if people actually did their jobs. But on May 4th, 2011, jumping ahead a couple of years, Casey's murder trial would begin. The prosecution would portray her as a party-loving mother who wanted to free herself from parental responsibilities, which based. Well, the defense claimed that Kaylee accidentally drowned in the family pool and that Casey's father, George Anthony, helped her cover it up. So from June 15th to June 23rd, 2011, that is when during the trial they went over all the forensic evidence. So I kind of want to go through each of the things just to let you know if you don't know, and to help with your opinion at the end of this, all right? So first of all, we have the human hair in the trunk. So a human hair was found in Casey Anthony's trunk and was examined, but lacked sufficient DNA for individual identification. Microscopic analysis showed it was similar to Kaylee Anthony's hair, but certainly was not confirmable. And mitochondrial DNA testing confirmed it belonged to a maternal lineage, meaning it came from either Kaylee, Casey, or Cindy Anthony. And notably, the hair exhibited decomposition characteristics suggesting it came from a deceased individual, which Casey's not deceased. Cindy's not deceased. Who's deceased? Kaylee. So I don't know why that is like I don't know, but it wasn't substantial enough for the jury. Anyway, next we have decomposition detection. So a controversial odor analysis conducted by Dr. Arped Vass detected compounds linked to human decomposition in the trunk's air samples, which I didn't even know was a thing until this happened. However, this method was disputed by the defense, which pointed out that certain key decomposition markers were missing and that the technique lacked scientific acceptance. And FBI testing confirmed compounds consistent with human decomposition and unusually high levels of chloroform. Okay. That's bad. And then we have the stained paper towel. So a paper towel found in the trunk contained fly pupae and a substance consistent with adipocere, which is like grave wax, which forms from decomposing fat. And the defense argued that the stain could have come from garbage, not a body, since fatty acids and food waste can also form that adipocere. So there's that. And then we of course have the presence of chloroform. You know, what Casey Anthony looked up on her computer. So both Dr. Vass's analysis and FBI lab tests found that high levels of chloroform in the trunk. However, the source of chloroform remained uncertain, either from decomposing body or from a spill in the carpet. And the prosecution tied this to Casey's internet searches to chloroform, while the defense challenged the reliability of both the evidence and the search history, which, like, is so dumb, dude, is so dumb. And then we have insect activity. Dr. Haskell, a forensic entomologist, testified that insects found in the trunk were species associated with decomposing bodies. However, the defense's expert, Dr. Huntington, countered that these insects were common in trash, that no DNA testing was done on the maggots to confirm human decomposition. And additionally, experts disputed that estimated date of insect activity, with some suggesting decomposition began in early July, while others estimated it started in mid-July. And then, of course, we have the cyber evidence. Casey Anthony's computer search included chloroform, self-defense, which the prosecution cited as premeditation evidence. However, Cindy Anthony claimed she conducted the searches, and she said she had been looking up the term after her dogs had eaten bamboo leaves that contained chlorophyll, though timestamp evidence contradicted her claim completely, as she was at work at the time. So I don't know if she was trying to, like, if she felt remorse for Casey at this point and was trying to help her cover it up. I'm not sure. And then we have the duct tape. So the prosecution argued that the duct tape found around Kaylee's remains was actually the murder weapon, theorizing it was placed over her mouth and nose to suffocate her. And an animation was shown in court to demonstrate this possibility. And the defense would counter that the jawbone remained attached to the skull, which is unusual in decomposition unless natural elements like hair, roots, or leaves hold it in place. And they argued that the duct tape was applied after decomposition, possibly as part of body disposal. So in summary, the forensic evidence presented in the Casey Anthony trial was largely circumstantial, with scientific disputes over decomposition, chloroform presence, and insect activity. And the prosecution framed it as proof of murder, while the defense challenged its credibility, leaving the jury without definitive forensic proof of how Kaylee actually died. And I'd like to note again that this probably all could have been avoided if they just listened to Kronk. If they just went after his call, you know? Maybe? I don't know. It's just so frustrating. So on June 23rd, 2011, Casey's attorney, Jose Baez, said that she was by her father as a child, an allegation George Anthony denied on the witness stand. And George Anthony also told the jurors that Kaylee didn't die at his house, and he denied disposing of her body and placing duct tape over her face at all. He would quote to say, "I would have done everything possible to save my granddaughter if what was said happened, said George Anthony, the only witness to testify at this point so far.
You learned in December of 2008 that the remains of your granddaughter were found. What effect did that have on you?
A deep hurt inside, and seeing what my wife and my son went through.
Up to that moment, had you held out the hope that Kaylee would be found alive?
Absolutely. Every day from July 15th until the day we were told it was Kaylee.
And Baez also claimed that Casey's brother made advances towards her and was given a paternity test to see if he was actually Kaylee's father, and that all these secrets eventually just led up to the cover-up of Kaylee's drowning, which is just like a crazy story to manufacture. But okay. Also, her brother wasn't the father. Spoiler alert. But Baez would say that Kaylee and her grandmother swam most of Father's Day on June 15th, 2008, and suggested that Cindy Anthony forgot to pull up the ladder that prevented the toddler from climbing into the pool on her own. And Baez suggested that Kaylee slipped into the pool the next day and no one was looking and she would accidentally drown. This is what the defense is claiming. And they claim that the distraught family panicked and decided to cover it up and bury the little Kaylee in their backyard, and they just didn't call the police, which makes no sense. Why would you cover up a complete accident by making it look like a murder? That makes no sense. Unfortunately, drowning is very common in kids, unfortunately, and you just call the police, call the ambulance. There's many cases in which you can call the ambulance and you could resuscitate a child, or there's no resuscitation attempts either. It's just, none of it makes sense, and it makes me angry. But Bays would say that Casey should have called 911. That's what she's guilty of. She's not guilty of murder. This is not a murder case. Shut the up. And prosecutors offered a timeline of Casey's whereabouts based on cell phone records, and it stretched from the time Kaylee was last seen by her grandparents until Casey Anthony told her mother in mid-July 2008 that Kaylee had been missing for a month. And during the lengthy opening statement, Bays said George Anthony planted the duct tape matching the brand found over Kaylee's mouth in a way that would implicate Casey. He said George Anthony took certain steps to make sure he was as far away from the situation and that Casey would end up taking the blame for this. Shut up. Shut up. And Casey was just emotional throughout this whole ordeal and crying and wiping her nose with a tissue. Very good actress, very good liar. Sorry. I know she's innocent until proven guilty, but it's just my opinion. Allegedly. I think she did it allegedly. 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 But the prosecution, meanwhile, focused on Casey's various lies to both her parents and police, as well as mounting circumstantial evidence, including incriminating Google searches. And Jeff Ashton, one of the prosecutors, would say, and I already said, no one makes an accident look like a murder. Whew. Just gives me chills. Just makes so much sense, doesn't it? And then on July 5th, 2011, 7 women and 5 men prepared to hand the verdict to the bailiff. And Anthony, then 25, was breathing very heavily and blinking back tears, putting on the performance of a century. And by most accounts, the woman dubbed the most hated woman in America was facing a lengthy prison sentence, and the death penalty was still on the table. And then the court clerk began reading the verdict in the hushed courtroom. And mouths dropped as Anthony was acquitted of all serious charges against her.
As to the charge of first-degree murder, verdict as to count 1, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of aggravated child abuse, verdict as to count 2, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child, verdict as to count 3, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict as to count 4. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict as to count 5. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict as to count 6. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict as to count 7. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment.
She was only convicted of 4 counts of providing false information to police. And he would sentence Casey to consecutively 1 year in county jail and $1,000 in fines each of the 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement officers, which was the maximum penalty prescribed by the law. So $4,000 basically. But because Casey had been incarcerated since October of 2008, she received more than 1,000 days in time served credit, and she was released 10 days after sentencing. On July 17th, less than 2 weeks later, she would just walk free from jail. And the public would just be unanimously outraged. I mean, the judicial system failed. And I'm not going to say it didn't. I mean, allegedly, think she did it. Allegedly, it seems as though, based off the evidence, I think she may have done it, but that's only alleged, And time has gone on. She kind of went into hiding after this whole thing, obviously facing a lot of public scrutiny. And then in March 2017, in her first public interview since the trial, Casey gave a series of interviews to the Associated Press about her case. And in these interviews, she discussed her acquittal, the death of her daughter Kaylee, and her life since the case.
I'm still not even certain as I stand here today about what happened. I don't
To your
know.
understanding, how did she die?
I don't know.
You don't know. Something about drowning, possibly.
Everyone else has their theories. I don't know.
So your parents had her,
My dad did.
and next thing you know, she's
I-
missing, right? How did it play?
I did what I was told. I don't remember too much of what happened.
And she would basically just go over and say she doesn't know how Kaylee's last hours unfolded. She understands why people have opinions about her. Good, bitch. And she still dreads the supermarket checkout line. You should, bitch. And she's happy and enjoys investigative work. You bitch. And she doesn't care what others think of her. She's okay with herself and sleeps well at night, knowing that her daughter died, that she doesn't know why, but she still sleeps very soundly at night, not knowing how or why her daughter died, which is awesome to know.
I don't give a shit about what anybody thinks about me. I don't care about that.
Yeah.
I never will. I'm okay with myself. I sleep pretty good at night.
And she didn't do what she was accused of. That's basically what she said in those interviews. So just bullshit, basically. And there's been multiple TV series, documentaries since. There's Prosecuting Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies, Casey Anthony, An American Murder Mystery, The Case of Kaylee Anthony, Casey Anthony's Parents, Casey Anthony, How Did We Get Here? She was on The First 48. She's on Call Me Chris's YouTube channel. Congratulations, okay? I'm bringing you back into the spotlight, and it's red, bitch. Okay? And that brings me into what we're really talking about today, and it's her big comeback. It's the utter audacity of this waste of oxygen coming onto a happy platform, and that is TikTok. Casey Anthony, aka America's Most Hated Mother, has launched a TikTok and a newsletter to reintroduce herself personally and professionally as a legal advocate. Go f yourself. And Anthony said in this TikTok recorded last week of me recording this now, that she wanted to continue working as a legal advocate. She felt compelled to advocate for herself and for her daughter. What daughter? Yeah, I thought you slept really soundly at night knowing that she was murdered by an unknown person. That daughter? Right. Got it. And she said she believes it's important to use her platform this way after people close to her were recently targeted and attacked. What platform? You don't have a platform. The only platform you have is your throne of lies, bitch. I'm sorry, I'm getting really mad. But anyway, she goes on to say,
as a proponent for the LGBT community, for our legal community, women's rights, I feel that it's important that I use this platform that was thrust upon me and now look at as a blessing as opposed to the curse it has been since 2008. She said, the curse being your daughter who died, who you maybe allegedly murdered. That one? Is that what we're talking about? Right, I keep forgetting.
I sweat to death. Okay. Today is Saturday, March 1st, 2025. This is my first of probably many recordings on a series that I'm starting. I am a legal advocate. I am a researcher. I've been in the legal field since 2011. And in this capacity, I feel that it's necessary, if I'm going to continue to operate appropriately as a legal advocate, that I start to advocate for myself and also advocate for my daughter. For those of you who don't know, my name is Casey Anthony. My daughter is Kaylee Anthony. My parents are George and Cindy Anthony. This is not about them. This is not in response to anything that they have said or done. That's not to say that I'm not going to respond at some point to some of the things that they have said and done. The whole point of this is for me to begin to reintroduce myself. I'm doing this both personally for me, but in a professional capacity. Moving forward, the majority of what you will see will be me speaking in a professional capacity. My goal is to continue to help give a voice to people, to give people tools and resources that they can utilize so they actually know where they can turn to. So with that, please join me on Substack. If you have questions, I will set up an email address where we can correspond directly. Up until this point, that has never happened. And it's only going to be on a limited basis regarding legal issues, legal matters. One of the main reasons that I'm doing this, there are people close to me who have been targeted and attacked recently. There are also people close to me who have had some recent things occur. And when necessary, people needed to step up, myself included. So as a proponent for the LGBTQ community, for our legal community, women's rights, I feel that it's important that I use this platform that was thrust upon me and now look at as a blessing as opposed to the curse that it has been since 2008. With that, these aren't going to be perfect. They're not going to be edited. Most of the time, they're not going to be short. But I am proverbially standing in the light, embracing this piece, still going to keep my privacy intact. So you will get very comfortable with my car. And I will explain in great detail why it's so important for people to protect their privacy. It's not just important to public figures, it's even more important to private individuals. And with the current climate in our country especially, it's that much more important, which is why I am utilizing the Substack platform. Yes, I am advertising this and publishing this on TikTok, possibly also through other meta platforms, but my intention is to separate from that and showcase even more why Substack is such an important resource for people to utilize moving forward. Anyway, I appreciate your time, and we'll see how this goes.
And then Anthony would go on to say that she has worked in the legal field since 2011, though she did not say exactly to what capacity. And the now defunct news website, The Messenger, reported in 2023 that Anthony was still working for McKenna and had also started a private investigation business. Investigate yourself, bitch. And Anthony directed viewers to her Substack, an online platform, and said she plans to set up an email address where people can correspond with her directly on a limited basis regarding legal issues. I'll make sure to email you about this weird case I heard about Kaylee Anthony. You know her? She's your dead daughter. You remember her? Right, keep forgetting about that. And she said she still plans to protect her privacy, will explain in great detail why doing so is important for public and private figures. Yeah, that amount of privacy is only necessary to you because you allegedly killed your daughter. And people are really mad about that. So maybe just crawl back into the hole you came from and leave TikTok. But anyway, she goes on to say, my goal is to continue to help give a voice to people, to give people tools and resources that they can utilize so they actually know where they can turn to. Would have been nice if you gave your daughter that ability. Gave her a voice, somewhere to turn to, instead of ditching her constantly and partying and leaving her with your mom and then not being able to take care of her and allegedly getting rid of her. Well, people are just as pissed as me. It didn't take very long for me to just get really opinionated, and I'm sorry, I'm not really sorry. Anyway, people are pissed on TikTok, all right, about this whole thing. A lot of people are pissed.
Those of you
Who is we exactly? Like, certainly not me. Like, they found her kid's corpse in the back of her car. I am not apologizing to her.
But she also has followers. She has gained a lot of followers, and it's slightly concerning, but maybe it's just people that just want to follow along what the frick she is doing on a platform. I just not a lot of things to say, not a lot of nice things to say, so I'm not going to say them all. It's what my mom always told me. And my mom got me into this case. I remember when she literally was watching this case and I was watching it with her as a little preteen, and she was just getting fired up. She's getting fired up. And so was I. I was like 12 and I was like, yeah, Mom, what you said. I'm going to make this my job. And I did. In an unprofessional way, but we're still here. But basically, the only positive thing about Casey Anthony is that she has single-handedly brought millions of people together who may not have ever agreed on one thing. And those people agree that Casey Anthony should maybe go back on trial. Allegedly. But I'm not saying anything. She's innocent. She is innocent until proven guilty. But right now, she's innocent. So I just want to cover my bases there and just say that, yeah, that's where we're at. You know, I'm not about spreading hate or anything like that. I say just ignore her existence. I think all she ever wanted was to be famous, and she got a little piece of that with this whole case, and now she's trying to abuse it by lying again, because she does that. She's a pathological liar. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that. If you like the video, and if you want to subscribe. This has been, and I will see you in the next one. All right. Goodbye. I love you. Goodbye. You beautiful. Goodbye.